All right, this is session number 27 of the Podcast Engineering Show. Let's do this. This is a special one. Here we go. Yeah. That's right. Welcome, everyone, to the show. I don't know why when they change chords, I always mimic it. I don't know. Anyway, welcome to the show. This is the Podcast Engineering Show. I'm Chris Kern. I produce podcasts for Forbes and Dun & Bradstreet, as well as select business authors. Every week on this show, we talk about the audio engineering side of podcasting. We get deep into the audio. We talk shop is what we do. This is not for the untechnical. I have a background in audio engineering in the music business, and since I entered podcasting about 4.5 years ago, I noticed a huge lack of audio skills in podcasting, and that's where this show can help. So if you implement the best of what you learn here, it'll make a big difference in your sound and your workflow and the speed of your workflow as well. And of course, you know who's with me. And I'm not talking about our special guest, which is a very special guest this week. I'm talking about Barry. Barry, you ready to go?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. You know, it's great when some people who listen to the show, they like Barry's voice, and then their kids also like Barry's voice because they hear it and they're like, oh, that's cool. So this show is brought to you by the Podcast Engineering School. It's a school I'm launching this fall. And now that I'm getting so far ahead of recording episodes, this episode, we're recording it like probably about a month early. So, check the website, podcastengineeringschool.com. You might see maybe the courses are up there already. It's going to be online courses, probably like 3-hour, intense kind of workshops, interactive exercises, all kinds of cool stuff. You'll see what it is. Go to the website, podcastengineeringschool.com. And of course, this show you can listen to anywhere you hear a podcast. You're probably already listening to it on your favorite podcatcher. If you listen every week, you know what happens is we end up talking about some of the same stuff, like a lot of things like the Heil PR40, that comes up a lot. Adobe Audition, that comes up a lot. Certain things come up a lot because they're core players in the whole podcast engineering space, but it's these little side tangents we take and the little offhand comments that either I make or the guest makes where you can really learn a lot. So today, I'm really excited to welcome Ray Ortega. Ray is the host of the Podcasters Studio, and he's also the host of the Podcasters Roundtable, which I hope one day I can stumble onto that show. Ray's been in the podcasting space since early 2007, and he actually makes his living as a podcast producer. So, Ray, welcome to the show, man.
Dude, and I do say dude, I'm from California. Chris, thanks for having me on the show, and I dig the intro. It's kind of feels like mine, where it rocks a little bit. I like that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you're I love what you're doing, and I'm so happy that we got to talk. I think you and I met at Podcast Movement a few years ago, and then it's funny, you meet someone face-to-face, and then you kind of email, especially if it's like a month or two later, and then you email a month or two later, and it's like, who is this guy again? So I think we kind of missed each other, but we're finally getting it on track. Barry, let me ask Barry. Ray, hold on one second. Barry, just need some advice. What am I going to need to get a good interview out of Ray Ortega today?
You're going to need a couple of horses or a couple of mules.
Okay, all right.
Drag it out.
Jeez. All right. Anyway, we're going to get to the speed round in 1 second, but the Podcasters Studio, you've been doing that show for a long time, right?
I have. I wish it was more consistent in the recent couple years, but I have been doing it since 2009.
Wow, that's 7 years. That's so cool. And you make your living. How do you make your living producing podcasts? You also produce video, right?
I do. It's a good question because I think a lot of people get confused when you have a podcast about podcasting. I think a lot of people think that's how you make your living, through clients and one-on-one consulting and stuff like that. And that's not it at all. I actually parlayed my hobby of podcasting when I started back, you mentioned early 2007, and was able to turn that into a full-time career producing for currently a nonprofit based out of Washington, D.C. And they have a whole network of shows. And when I met my manager, he was doing everything by himself, and they were becoming fairly successful, and they needed some help. And I was about the only person that he could find that could actually tell him what a podcast was. And this is back in 2007, right? A lot of people with the skills of production, but at that time there was a real shift from, classic in-studio production to online media, podcast. And so I spoke the language. So I didn't necessarily have formal training in production, but I did have all this knowledge and experience in podcasting. So they were willing to give one for the other. And he was pretty forward-looking in knowing that he needed someone who spoke the language of podcasting more than he needed someone who had, maybe a degree in production, because one thing could be taught and the other was it was new. It was so new. So I have been doing that since 2008. It was the summer of 2008, one of the best phone calls of my life, when someone basically said, hey, can we pay you to do something that you absolutely love and are doing for free already? And I said, yes, please.
So this is awesome, because you're living proof of the reason that I'm starting the podcast engineering school, because there's jobs out there. There's companies and individuals who need podcast engineers and producers and people who know what they're talking about in terms of podcasting as well as in audio. So I'm gonna actually have certification courses. I plan on having in-depth courses that certify individuals as a certified podcast engineer, and that's basically giving my stamp of approval that this guy knows what he's doing, or this girl knows what they're doing. They can handle it all. They have the training, and they can do it. And it's so cool that you've been doing this since 2008. I love that.
Yeah, it's it's something I've talked about in several talks that I've given, in that as podcasting becomes more popular, more organizations, companies, even solo entrepreneurs, they're going to be looking to start a podcast. And who are they going to turn to? They're going to turn to the people who are already doing it. So, I always tell people, and I didn't realize what I was doing when I started a podcast, which was really building a portfolio of my skill of how to build a podcast, how to promote, how to grow an audience. And I wasn't really looking at it as a portfolio so much as I was just trying to learn the craft. But it's kind of like an artist coming out of school. They have a degree and a portfolio, but you don't have a piece of paper, but you do have a body of work that you can say, here it is. Here's what I can do. I can do this for you, because those people are going to go to the people who are already doing it and doing it well. So I always say by being a podcaster, you are becoming the go-to people. So, it aligns perfectly with what you're doing. I think that that's exactly what's going on in the people in the space right now. And it is still early, even though we've been doing this for, way over a decade.
Sure.
That, it's still early, and you can do exactly what I'm doing, especially because it's just exploding right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of you listening right now, you listening right now, you produce a podcast. Maybe you produce a few. There's a career in this, and probably that's why you're listening as well. So you did not have a formal audio engineering background. So I want to get into the lightning round, because we're going to go over your workflow and your equipment, because we love doing that. But you were doing podcasting. And you were, like you said, you built up a portfolio of that, you're a podcaster and a podcast producer. So you added your audio skills as you went. How did you add your audio skills, actually?
Well, yeah, it's funny, because the Podcaster Studio, which is my show about how to podcast, is really kind of started so I could learn my audio skills. I started off podcasting as a video podcaster. Video was something I was always into as a kid, and bought my first camera off the shopping channel or whatever it was called then, and edited video and really taught myself. And then, of course, in 2006 or whenever YouTube launched, I call it YouTube University. There's just infinite amount of content there. With the amount of stuff that's online these days, you can kind of put yourself through school if you're willing to sit there and trade your time. You don't have to trade money, you can trade time, which is, to me, as valuable as money, to learn these things. And that's what I did. I just spent countless hours and no sleep learning everything that I needed to learn, right? I didn't go super in depth, audio engineering level. On my show, if I need that person, if I need those answers, I bring in the expert that is trained to be an audio engineer to fill in the gaps of my own. So even by producing a show, I'm getting free consulting when you do an hour interview, right?
Yeah.
It's just free consulting of the best people you can find. Almost everyone will say yes to an interview. So, it really is self-taught. And again, I was doing video, and then I said, I want to do audio only. It usually goes the other way around. People usually start with audio and then go video. Right. I started the Podcaster Studio. I had some audio skills on my video work, but yeah, I wanted to buy mixing boards and compressors and all this stuff that I wasn't using in video. And, that's kind of what it was, learn on the job type thing for me.
That's cool. And you actually, the Podcasters Roundtable, which is a show you do, which is it's a live like video broadcast, right?
Right. Yeah. We use Google Hangouts on Air to do that live. And that's, basically like Skype, but on steroids. You can bring in up to 10 people. And it's broadcast live there. And I record it basically in studio. I record my own version here, the audio only, and let the YouTube live on its own. And then I produce the audio only into an audio only podcast and release that as well a podcast. And the video is not technically a podcast because it doesn't live on iTunes.
All right, so we're going to talk behind some people's backs now. That's this part of the show.
All right.
No, actually, we don't do part of the show. But I want you to, when I give you one of your co-hosts' names on the Podcasters Roundtable, I want you to give me the first 3 words that come to mind, okay?
Wow.
This is totally unplanned. Daniel J. Lewis.
Smart, calculated, voluntarily bald.
Oh, jeez.
He shaved his head. He shaved his head.
Yes, he shaved his head because
it's a different look. Yeah.
That's how he rolls. I mean,
that's right.
You know what I mean? He rolls his own way.
Like I said, he's calculated and he did it on purpose for reasons.
Nice.
that
For
he
reasons.
can tell you about.
All right. Dave Jackson.
Fun. Mentor. Really fun.
There you go. Really fun.
I think of Dave, and I don't know if you listen to his show, he does characters, and Binky and the Wiz being my favorite.
Wow.
And it's so funny because I was recently on a video shoot in South America, and I loaded up the podcast down and so I could travel. And when I about halfway through that trip, I was like, I'm missing home a little bit. I punched up Dave, and it felt like home. And Dave was being fun and funny. So I'm learning while I'm being comforted and entertained. So Dave's like a father figure, even though he's probably not that much older than me.
Right? Yeah. Dave's awesome. All right. Those are your co-hosts? Any other co-hosts?
Those are the 2. I started the show, and then of course I was, in that niche podcast about podcasting, and I asked Daniel and Dave if they wanted to join me, and it really just became, well, they're the co-hosts. And they've been there, I think, pretty much every round that we've done. I call them rounds instead of episodes. But
right.
And that's it. And the other key to that show is that there's almost always a new roundtabler, and that is someone from the podcasting community, a podcaster. I want to have a new podcaster on every time. And, myself, Dave, Daniel, we all have shows about podcasting, and we talk about podcasting every episode because that's what the show's about on our individual shows. But every podcaster now has an incredible amount of experience, whether they started a week ago, right, and just trying to get a show started, or they've been podcasting now for 8 years or something.
Right.
And so they don't necessarily have a show about podcasting, but they have so much to share. So it's always been my goal to get those people on and give them that platform so that other people can learn from all this enormous wealth and experience out there. So that's really the 3rd co-host, or I guess I consider us all co-hosts.
Right.
The 4th host would be at least one new roundtabler, and I try to get on a couple at least
cool.
every round.
Yeah, I find that
including
with this
yourself soon.
Yeah, sure. So
Get you on.
I find that too. I find that having guests that are, not necessarily expert audio engineers is great because it becomes a very practical conversation and a very utilitarian conversation where, you know what I mean? Like, in the end of the day, we have to get the podcast done. We have to record it and edit it and put it up. And whether it's you have some fancy process or if you're just total bootstrapping everything, minimalist everything, they're both equal in the eyes of in the podcasting world, really, I think.
Yeah, and I think these days, I'm coming to you. You probably might get into this. So through what is a USB and an XLR microphone. I can use it either way. And to be honest with you, I can make the USB sound as good as the XLR that's coming through the compressor and the audio interface and everything else. So, I think if you know what you're doing, you can make anything sound really good for a podcast.
Right. So before we get into the lightning round, I keep pushing off this lightning round. No, we're going to get into it. But how really into good sounding audio are you? I mean, are you fanatical about really getting good sounding audio, processing it, using a lot of plugins? Are you really into it, or are you just kind of into it? Where are you?
It's a great question, because I bet the perception is that I'm crazy into it.
Right.
And I'm really a stickler for just clean audio. That said, I'm recording right now in a way less than ideal situation. The air conditioner is running. I tried to turn it off, but it's kicked back on. It's just too hot here in California today. I'm in a room that is basically 4 flat walls and some glass in front of my computer. I mean, so I know how to do a few things to make that sound okay, but I guess if I was, crazy about it, I would be maybe I'd be in my closet if I needed insane audio, or I would be somewhere other than what I am now. But I know I can produce good audio with using some of the skill and knowledge that I have. So yeah, I feel like, right now it's hard for me not to reach for buttons and knobs and turn them, because I'm hearing things. I'm like, I don't quite like what I'm hearing. Let me twist the knob, but I'm okay. I've learned to, when I first got the job that I have, there was a director of our organization, and she said, don't let perfect get in the way of good enough. And in podcasting, that's pretty important, because a lot of people will plan, practice, and they'll never launch. And if you're doing a weekly show, which is what I would say is a sweet spot, a weekly show, that week comes about really fast. And if you are so hard on yourself that you are not willing to publish stuff because it may not be perfect, you're going to have a hard time sticking around in podcasting. So I've learned, I'm a recovering perfectionist, to do the best job that I can, improve every time, or fix it. If something went wrong, just do it, ship it, publish it. You won't learn until you actually publish it.
Yeah.
Like, you can record, but I tell people all the time, like, you have to publish, and it has to go out in the world, and people have to hear it before you're going to get better. That's the only way. It has to actually be out there. So long answer, or short answer to a long response there, is that I would say right in the middle somewhere. Good enough is become good for me.
Right. And I that's interesting. I think that a lot of podcasters, right, they're not totally into audio. They don't want to become an audio engineer.
Right.
However, especially the courses I'm going to teach through the podcast engineering school, it's going to be like, look, learn the fundamentals, learn some tips and tricks, and you will be in the 99th percentile of people who know about audio. you know?
I mean, that goes back to my USB thing. Is I think that a lot of times people start buying gear, and you can actually go the wrong way. You do worse. Like, you actually make the audio worse. Like, I have literally hooked up like every piece of gear, put it through the computer, and then just plugged in USB. And I was like, man, you know what? The USB just sounds better. Let's go with it. I use USB to go to for the roundtable every week, and it sounds fine. Now, Google does their own stuff that makes it sound pretty bad. But for a lot of interviews where I just need to jump on a Skype or something like that, I have no issues if I'm in a good environment plugging in USB with the right microphone and going with that. Because again, a lot of people, you get into compression and gates and all that stuff, and you can mess up your audio really fast.
Yeah.
Really fast.
Yeah, especially to tape, like just plugging the mic in to a mic pre and then compressing it and gating it before it even gets to the computer. That can be sketchy.
Yeah, I don't like to bake stuff in general. I say that as I'm sitting here talking through a compressor and a gate. But it's better, I think, in most cases, especially if you're new. Don't get it raw and then work with it in post-production, because you have all those options in post-production.
That's true. However, using a compressor to tape, because that's what I do as well, use a compressor to tape, is...
The funny part is you say tape.
I know, well... That's what we say.
That shows your roots.
There's no more modern word for that.
Live to hard drive. That's what I call. You go to drive or take hard drive. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Live
chip?
to hard drive. Unless you're saying it that way, it does sound funny. But
yeah.
but tape.
I know. Well,
But I mean that in some places that gives you some legitimacy because that's where you came from, probably.
yeah, it definitely was. Absolutely.
Exactly.
But even Alex Bloomberg talks, to tape. Well, he's probably older than me. But yeah, well, look, I'm open for a new phrase. If someone can give a phrase that is really good. I don't like the, to drive or to recorder. I guess to recorder might work.
Recorder's okay. I mean, it is what you're doing, right? I mean,
or to AD converter.
right.
Analog to digital converter.
If
Anyway.
we're not careful, we're going to start debating the word podcasting, and we don't want to go down that road.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. Should it be called podcasting? Oh, my God. All right. Let's get to the lightning round. So take us, Ray. Give us the overview of your equipment. Now, I know you have a different setup today, but your normal setup, your everyday setup, take us through it. You're about to sit down to record an episode. Just talk about, the equipment, your mic, where it's going through, where it's being recorded, if you have guests and all that. Just give us the brief overview, then we'll pick through it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because on the Podcaster Studio, probably over the last 15 episodes at least, I start by saying, here's the setup for today.
Oh, really? Wow.
Like it's different every time. Like I
Okay.
can't stop myself. So I would say most typical these days right now as we sit here in August 9th, 2016 recording this, I'm going to go, well, oh man, it really does even depends on the show, right? The Roundtable is going to use the ATR like I'm using right now, the ATR 2100. Let me tell you what I'm using right now.
Okay.
I'm using the ATR 2100, which is a cheap microphone, but sounds great. It's USB and XLR. It has dual output, and which you can use at the same time, which is pretty awesome. Really awesome, actually. And I do use it that way. But I've got that today going XLR into a DBX 286, which is a mic preamp processor, and just a tad of compression on there, a seriously tiny touch of de-essing, and a pretty light expander. And then that is going, in this case, today I'm going to the Scarlett 2i4, which is an audio interface, which is then getting to you, the browser, via USB, the interface. But I'm also then taking the output of that Scarlett and I'm recording it on a Tascam DR60D so that this can be a double ender if you want it, or a backup. It's always nice to have a backup, especially the beauty of recording with podcasters is they usually can record themselves.
Right.
So you can get some nice audio, but that's pretty typical. Now, I will say that for the Podcaster Studio, I'm probably going to go like high LPR 40 to the DBX direct to the Tascam DR60D and call it a day.
Okay. Oh, wait. Say that again. The PR40.
PR40 to my DBX 286S, and that's going to go direct into the Tascam DR60D, which would be live to drive.
Live to drive. But then how does it get to the internet? How does it get into a computer?
I just take the file off the DR60D and bring it into my software, which is Adobe Edition.
Oh, you're talking about Podcaster Studio. That's where you don't
Yes.
have any co-hosts. You're
Sorry,
not broadcasting
I switched
live.
it up on you. I think I mentioned it, but I did switch it up quick. Yes, if I'm going to do the Podcaster Studio, see, there's a lot of dynamics, right? So the Podcaster Studio is solo, by myself, recorded. I mean, I turned the computer off. I don't even have a computer on because I don't want that fan noise.
Nice.
And so, yeah, that just gets recorded literally like right to drive.
Yeah.
And I'm done with it. So yes, Podcasters Roundtable, much different because as I mentioned, I'm using the ATR and I do send that via USB to the computer for the Google Hangout on Air. And then everything else, the sort of in-studio recorded, gets recorded direct to the DR60D. And I actually take the Hangout audio and I pipe that into the recorder as well. And what that does, and so I separate those channels. So you basically have me with a raw signal direct to my recorder, because and this gets weird because the ATR is going to Google Hangouts via USB and it's going to my recorder via the XLR.
Oh, cool. I thought that's what
And
you were
it gets
doing.
weird. There's a video on.
I love that.
I have a video on YouTube. It gets weird, and then everybody on the Hangout, unfortunately, everybody gets their own track. But I try to dial them in as best as possible. But what I'll say is that the audio that I'm getting from them in real time, because it's recorded live, that audio is better than what you're ultimately going to see on like a replay on YouTube, because YouTube's going to further compress it.
Right.
So it sounds pretty good. It is what it is, right? I mean, it's coming through basically VoIP software online. It's fine. And, never get a complaint from podcasters about the roundtable. And yeah, do we have some audio issues sometimes by having to combine those signals? Yes. But, again, perfect, good enough.
Yeah. So now, okay, so that's how you record the stuff, but now the stuff that you have to edit, where do you do your editing and finalizing and mastering?
So I now do that in Adobe Audition, but I would say it's probably not that recent now. Maybe it's been a couple years. I held on to the almost literal death to Soundtrack Pro, which used to come in the old Final Cut suite with Final Cut Pro. And it was just, I loved it. I absolutely loved it, to the point where I still bring it up in an interview. But I went down with the ship to basically, way after they had sort of killed it, I kept using it. And to the point where I wouldn't even upgrade my OS because I didn't want that software to go away.
Classic.
And it's just a really clean audio editor, and I loved it. But I finally got Audition to do all the things that I was able to do on Soundtrack. And it's nothing special. It's just, it really comes down to a personal workflow, right? And, when it comes to audio editors, most of them do all the same stuff. It's just some of them do it better than the others, right? It becomes easier. Podcasters tend to use the audio editor that they learn on. And so I had to make that switch, and I was able to basically mold Audition into what I want. And now I insanely love it. And I'm in that same place again where, gosh, I would absolutely hate it if I couldn't use Audition.
Right. Now, how do you process individual tracks in Audition? Do you EQ and compress everything again and use de-essers and everything?
Yeah, because on the recordings, even the reason I bought the DBX primarily was for a really good preamp. The processing that it does for me is kind of a bonus.
Right.
And I don't use it very much because, again, I do like to get a raw file and do that stuff in post-production. So if I use any of it, it's very light. And then in post-production, I will always do a little EQ. And I will do, now, sort of newer is loudness normalization, which is a standard that, I think most, it's tough because it's not necessarily super simple. It's simple in concept, but to execute, it's not as easy. Audition has recently made this easier. So I will loudness normalize. This basically makes sure that one episode is the same loudness as the other episode, meaning, and it's real loud. It's not, people think that they are making their audio, the same loudness when they see their average peak on their meter hitting -3. They're like, well, I get it to about -6, so it's about -6. Well, it's not how it's measured. That's just, all you're doing is measuring the peaks of your audio, right? So loudness actually measures the way the human ear hears it. So it gives a consistency across your episode. So I do loudness normalization, and I go way into depth. You've had Georg from Aphonic on your show, and we go way in depth, like hours on the Podcaster Studio about loudness normalization. So I won't bore people with it, and they should dive in. In fact, go listen to the Podcaster Studio. Find the Aphonic episodes. But I do that, and Aphonic makes it super simple. You could literally drag and drop, and they will make basically what the target is for podcast and mobile devices is this -16 LUFS. That's the standard they use. And so I will do that to every file now. So a little EQ, little compression, loudness normalize it with protection for the true peak and all that mumbo jumbo, and that's pretty much it. I don't do a whole lot to it because it's so funny because I always tell people that in most cases podcasters, they are the single worst people to be working on their audio. Like, you're your own worst enemy, right? No one likes their own voice when they start, and so they take things way too far. The compression, they really crank up the low end to try to get that low boomy sound.
Yeah.
And so I'm recovering from that as well. And natural. I'm all about natural now, especially in a podcast. Where the podcaster is more relatable than the morning shock jock who may be hired partially for his voice, but a podcaster is more of a real connection, someone that you feel like you could talk to, that you could just go next door and have a beer with, right? You feel a connection because they sound more like you they are more like you. So I think that natural processing, getting it at a good level and getting it clean, I almost never do, the key is to not have to do noise removal. And I try not to do that. And if I do, just a tad, if I have to. But those are some of the same things that I do. I mean, I really, again, it's like have a little EQ, like a standard, like roll off the low end, things that every audio producer can do, right? With audio, it's always different, right? You bring it in and you have to work with what you have for who you recorded, which can be tough because you can't always just you can't just give someone like a formula and be like, here, apply this to your audio.
Right.
Sound great, right? You have to know when you're turning the knobs what you're doing. But there are a couple things, like rolling off that low end below 60 or 80 hertz or something, in my opinion, that everyone can do.
Pretty much.
There's not a whole lot of that, but loudest normalization, those type of things. And so I don't do a lot. And I think that's important because I think some people try to get down in the weeds too much and they overdo it.
Totally. Easy to overdo it.
Yeah.
Now, do you use native Audition plugins or do you have any third-party plugins that you use?
I do. It's funny because third-party plugins, that's where the game changes. Like the serious audio engineer has like thousands of dollars invested in plugins. And there always seems to be this, like, there's this level that you can get to. And even when I was starting, it's like, why can't I quite remove the noise the way that someone else is? Right? Why does someone's audio sound? Well, there's this extra level. They say it's not about the gear and stuff like that, but there are some amazing plugins that cost a lot of money. I have not gone down that road. I don't need to, but trust me, there is some stuff that I wish I had. I mean, even the RX, the isotope stuff, which is actually relatively affordable now. I would love to have that. But short answer, I use the native plugins in Audition. And one of the reasons I also do that is I like to work with the stuff that I'm going to teach the other podcasters to use that almost everybody has.
Right.
Like everyone's got an EQ and a compressor. If you're using Audacity, you can get all these things. If you're using GarageBand, it's all in there. So I try to work with what I have as sort of as proof of concept that you don't have to spend thousands of dollars.
Sure.
But trust me, there are a few things that I would like to have.
Yeah. Well, you have a Focusrite Scarlett. You said
Right.
a 2i4. I think there's some plugins that come with, I think it's every Scarlett. I don't know. I have a bunch of 2i2s and I have an 18i20, but the Focusrite Red EQ and the Focusrite Red compressor are two of the plugins that come with these Scarlett devices. And those are very high quality. That's a very high quality EQ and a very high quality compressor.
Nice.
And
and I'm pretty sure I do have them, and I feel like the wrapper is still on. Like,
yeah,
I
dude.
Even
break that out, especially the EQ. Well, both, but the EQ. When you turn up the high frequency on the EQ, when you want to boost the high end, and you boost it with the Focusrite Red EQ, it's a different high end than other EQs, man. It's just smooth. It's nice. It's like butter.
You just cost me a good 5 hours.
Right?
To go explore. See?
That should be easy. Actually, it's even, well, it just has knobs like the physical Focusrite Red, because I actually had a physical Focusrite Red like 15 years ago.
Nice.
It was a mic pre and a compressor. It was one unit, 2 rack space. It was a Red 7, I think, because they had Red 1, Red 2, Red 3. I think it was a Red 7, mic pre compressor, and it was worth about $3,500.
Nice.
And it was, I mean, the mic pre was just ridiculous. I mean, you don't notice the difference until you try something like that. And then you're like,
Right.
whoa, dude.
Right.
All right. But let me ask you this, because I'm curious. What percentage of podcasters use Adobe Audition?
Oh, man. It seems, so here's the problem is that I'm in my niche, right?
Right.
It seems like everybody.
Okay.
And it's a tougher tool to use these days because you can't just buy it one off. You got to subscribe to it.
Oh.
Right? So Adobe went to this subscription software, and I'm sure you could get an older version probably and do it. I do the subscription because I use a lot of the stuff, Photoshop and Premiere and After Effects. But so it's hard for me to recommend, but I don't know what percentage. Again, I have a very skewed view of the podcast world because I deal with podcasters, specifically the ones that are very interested in their audio.
Right.
So they are spending the money to use something like Audition, right? Whereas I think most, you hear, all the NPR people, all the sort of traditional media people, they all have, what is it?
Not Pro Tools.
Pro Tools. Yeah. So it's because of where they came from. I think a lot of podcasters use GarageBand. Like a lot of ones who will never listen to the Podcaster Studio or this show here.
Right.
Because they don't drill down like that. They use what they have. So
right, and probably Audacity as well.
Audacity probably huge because it's free. And, also, again, where do people learn how to podcast? And if you Google it or something, a lot of people are going to recommend probably Audacity because it's free.
Right. Oh, my goodness. That's like the name of the game in podcasting is how to do everything for free.
It's tough because, it's amazing. I work with a lot of podcasters, and certainly over the years I have. And, you got someone who will buy a $60 video game, but they don't want to spend $50 on a microphone. It's like, right. At some level, you're about to put yourself out there in the world consistently on a weekly basis for years, and you don't want to put a little investment in it to something you can sell if it doesn't work out. So, it's a tough one. At some level, it's like, look, if you're not going to invest in yourself and your show a little bit, there's only so much I can help you.
Right. Well, I like the fact that you got the DBX 286S, which is, and you said mainly you got it for the mic pre, which is a great idea. Like that's one way to upgrade what you're doing. I mean, that's one way to upgrade your sound if you're analog, obviously,
right.
Is to get a better mic pre. Now, if you're using a mixer, some of the Mackie mixers have very good mic pre's. The DBX might be a little better. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. All right, so you're in Audition. You're making your edits and you're using some EQ, you're using the loudness normalization, or, you're getting everything loud. And you mix it down in, what kind of MP3 do you mix it down to publish?
This has changed over the years as well, but I found, for me, now you would think I'd say 128, right? Because it's pretty much the highest you can go without just blowing up the file size.
You talking stereo or mono?
I'm talking joint stereo.
Yep.
Which is a little different, but so the Podcaster Studio, sometimes I'll go out. I have this sort of measure that is based on nothing, but once I get around 50 megabytes, which for an hour, you at 128, you're easily going to hit that. I start to feel like I can't put that out there because a lot of people have bandwidth restrictions, or maybe you're running to get on the plane. It's like, well, I can't download a 50 megabyte file. Like I want this now, and I've chosen not to download stuff because it's just too big.
Oh wow!
Or I don't have time. But again, if you're talking about someone in another country, because we are a global medium, you have to be careful what you're pushing out there. So I like 96 kilobits per second at joint stereo MP3. I think it's a great compromise between quality and file size. So, but that said, I will push out like a 64 kilobit mono file if it's like a 2-hour episode, and I want to keep those. I want to keep the file size down. So I would say it's dependent. I do vary what I put it out at. I would love to put it out at 128 if it was a half-hour show. Fine. And again, spoken word versus music, there's a lot of debate on that, but you've got cool music in your intro, and I found that even the music you choose, some compresses better than others.
Yeah.
And my intro music does not compress well. And it's like one of the reasons I want to change my intro music, because I can't stand to compress it at 64 or something and hear what it does. And we're talking like 15 seconds of your episode. It's not worth it to push out a big file size for like your 15 seconds of audio. But again, we're the worst people to be working on our own audio because we're our worst critics. So I really do vary in that continuum depending on, really, I think file size is what dictates it for me.
That's interesting. Mono, yeah. That's one reason this show I put out in stereo 128 because of the music. Intro and outro, it's like I just can't, look, I come from the music industry background too. So it's like, there's never even a discussion of mono. I mean, but however, I just saw an interview with Neil Young where someone was like, I think he put out his latest record is in mono or something. Nice. And they're like, why did you do mono? He's like, in mono, you really get the depth. He's like, when it's stereo, everything is just scattered and it's just too whatever. He's like, you really get some depth in mono. And I'm like, well, yes, but if you use stereo properly, you can get the depth and a little bit of width. So anyway, but he's a unique guy.
Yeah, who's going to argue?
Exactly.
Neil Young.
And plus I applaud what he's doing, trying to put out high quality music audio. So he's not, regular CD quality is 16-bit 44.1
right.
wave. He wants to make it like 24-bit 96 kilohertz, like really high and even higher actually. But the files are so big and it's like
yeah. And so in podcasting, I really do think it presents a dilemma for the podcaster, especially the one who has got that ear or is an audio engineer, but you really have to consider the audience. I think it's important.
Well, the good thing is if you focus on, like, if you learn how to make the quality of your sound very good, then things compress a lot better. Like, meaning you're starting with a better sound and then you can compress it to mono or whatever. It'll still sound good.
Yeah.
So, and again, back to fundamentals.
Yep.
So talk to me about fixing bad sounding audio. How do you do? I'm sure over the years you've recorded tracks or had guests that just sound heinous. How do you handle that?
Record it better. I gave a talk at Podcast Movement, I guess probably, I'm not sure if it's the one where we met, but probably. And it was on post-production. And I think I spent the first 20 minutes of that talk talking about recording. I mean, before you even get to post-production. And I think this is so huge. If you learn, again, some basics like you're talking about, you record it right, you're not going to have bad audio, or at least you can recover from it. Because, in audio, if it's really bad, there's only so much you can do. Someone actually tweeted a picture of a quote that I had said during that talk, and I said, you can't make bad audio good, you can only make it less bad. And so, because, in video, you can recover more than in audio. Once it's peaked or it's just, just blends in with like a really noisy background, it's really hard to fix. So I talked about using a little bit of noise removal. Aphonic, which I mentioned again, which is a great tool, even their algorithm, sometimes you can drag and drop. I've dragged and dropped problem audio into Aphonic, which is sort of new. It's been on the scene for a couple years, and been amazed what it does. But after that, if it doesn't do the job, you got to get into Audition. And again, I don't have some of those better plugins. So, I'm using native tools in Audition to sort of, whether I'm trying to, notch out a sound in an EQ, or, I'm using noise removal. I mean, Audition has some crazy tools. This is one thing where Audition can help you a little bit more than maybe something Audacity is, because they've got the spectral display where you can actually see noise and literally pretty much use a tool to erase it. But you're going to quickly, when you start taking audio out, you start dipping into the range of the frequency of your vocal. Yeah. And it affects it. So it doesn't take much before you're basically got your podcaster sounding like they're underwater. Yeah. And it's very tough. So, it's tough. And my best advice really is spend more time on that front end. And if you do have bad audio, do what you can with the tools you have. I mean, you can reach out to me or obviously you and see what can be done. But, depending on the content, I mean, there may be audio you have to scrap, but if it's that interview that you just is really good, and as long as it's listenable, as long as I can hear it, don't necessarily scrap it. Do what you can and put it out there. This is part of that sort of grow as you go I talk about all the time. Learn your lesson and move on. But, there are cases where it's like, well, I just can't use that. Or I've been on other podcasts. I've been interviewed, and then I go back and listen. And I'm like, "What? Did you put a microphone up to a telephone, up to a speaker?" I was like, and I can't promote. Like I literally can't promote. I mean, it sounds terrible, but trust me. I mean, it's so bad. Why would you share that with the audience? So that's very important. If you're doing interviews, you need to take the time to make sure you're getting at least audio that is, listenable in a car. So take that extra time because you want to respect that person's time that they spent, and you don't want it to sound that bad. And it remains to be seen what we get out of this one, but
nice. Well, I tell you what, I want to have a contest with the Podcast Engineering School. I want to have two contests. Number one, who can send me the most horrible sounding audio.
Nice.
And then whatever horrible sounding audio wins that contest, then we're going to have a contest who can make that sound the best. We're going to give that file to anyone who wants it, and then
that's great.
You process it on your own and send it back. And anyway,
I feel like those people with those super expensive plugins are gonna have a bit of an advantage there. But
I know. Well, there's one I want to try. Actually, I'm hopefully going to interview the CEO of this company called Zeneptic, and they have a whole suite of plugins, but one of them actually removes reverb.
Oh, so that's you know what? I have a Deverb plugin. That's actually one of the few plugins I bought. It was on sale.
Okay.
And for what it is, it does a decent job. And I don't think it's a secret, but I think Auphonic is working on that. And I'm really hoping, because based on my experience with Auphonic, they do some pretty amazing stuff. And if he figures it out and gets the algorithm to take out reverb, it'd be amazing, because that's a huge thing in podcasts, especially we work in studios that are not ideal.
Yeah.
We have a lot of reverb. Where I'm talking to you right now, it's a ton of reverb if I pull the mic away just a little bit. But that deverb thing is tricky, and I have one that knocks it down, but that's probably one of the biggest audio problems that you get, because people don't know, good mic technique, or they're sitting too far away from the microphone, or they're in the wrong environment. And it just, it sounds like the mic's on the other side of the room.
Yeah. Well, I have some very high-end clients who use a Blue Yeti on a conference table with 2 or 3 people sitting around it. Oh. And try to make that sound good, man. Jeez. Yeah.
It's tough.
That's like, okay, Chris, do your magic. Go.
And, fix it in post is the joke, right?
Oh, it's nutty.
It is.
And you know what's been nutty lately? I've had a few people who, and I'm gonna demonstrate it as I'm talking. They'll be talking normal, and usually they're low volume speakers, and they'll just be talking. But by the time they get to the end of their sentence, they just trail off. And talk there, and it's like, dude, can you finish a sentence?
Yeah, I have a host that that trails off every time, and outside of doing a ton of enveloping where I'm raising that part, it's a pain, and sometimes even I talked about a little bit about post-production coming out of Audition. Sometimes I will even then drag and drop the final wave into a passive levelator, because one thing that you can't do easily, at least maybe you can tell me how to do this, but the sort of automatic enveloping, which the Auphonic has this leveler, and it sort of helps, but I do it sometimes just like, I'm talking like the lightest of touch-ups to give it a pass. But yeah, I mean, you've got those different level changes across even one person. That's tough, because I'm not going to go over an hour interview. This is part of this sort of, at some point you need to work on it and then get it out there. But, you could spend hours trying to fix something like that. Well,
I'll give one secret weapon away. I mean, whatever. I mean, I have some secret weapons, but I don't mind sharing them because they should be shared, and that's what this show's about. So there's a plugin I got. It's called Vocal Rider.
Nice.
And this it's like a fader, and you set the range of the fader. So you could set it from, let's say, -5 to +5, meaning, and this fader starts at 0, and you set the target level. So, for instance, let's say you choose -17 RMS. When the person speaks, if they're louder than -17, it rides the fader down automatically.
Yeah.
And if they're lower, it rides the fader up. Now, I don't set the limits at -5 and +5. I actually set the limits at basically -1 and +1, because if the fader rides too much, then it becomes way too apparent and it sounds unnatural and it doesn't sound right. But a 2 dB swing of boosting up the low part and then just taking down the loud part makes a big difference, actually. I use that all the time, almost on every voice I process.
And that link's going to be in the show notes?
Oh! All right, link in the show notes.
How much is that?
Oh, it's not much. It's like maybe $50, maybe $70. I don't know. It's total. You can get it. You can get it.
Nice. I like it. Yeah, it's almost like an upward expansion with a compression. It's all like I think Audacity, I feel like they have something called like a compander or something that does something like that, but it's pretty complex. But yeah, I feel like that's always been sort of like one of those things. I was like, why does this not exist?
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to take a look at that.
Yeah, Vocal Rider's cool. Plus, you can either have the fader move fast or slow. There's like 2 settings.
Nice.
So if you set it to fast, it'll literally jerk down the fader if something's loud.
Gotcha.
Or jam it up if it's low, or it's. I always use it on slow because you don't want it to make any drastic.
No,
moves.
I want that natural transition.
It's natural, and you can't make it ride too much. You just make it ride a little to help because you do want to be transparent. Well, there you go, Vocal Rider. So, what else? Can you think of anything else you do with audio as far as processing goes to make it sound better or to help out? One thing we didn't talk about really was maybe something that really expedites the time of your production. How do you save time? Do you use shortcuts or?
It's funny because I tell people, first of all, how many times have I said, it's funny, but
yeah, it's interesting.
In audio, you have these quirks. You have these quirks where I think I'd say right after every sentence, like I'm trying to affirm my own self. So, hey, if you're a podcaster, I've been doing this a long time and you're still working on that, don't feel bad. I still have those audio tics. But when I tell people, if you watch me edit, it's like watching someone play a piano because I'm just flying. Like I can let the playhead go and never stop the playhead. I mean, ripple delete is like my favorite thing in the world. And that was one thing that I loved on Soundtrack Pro that Audition wasn't doing exactly like I wanted it to do. And so I had to set up my own keyboard shortcut to make sure that I could get this ripple delete all with my left hand. It's like a Shift Command X thing. And so as the playhead rolls, I can make my cuts. And, I always say editing audio is like seeing in the Matrix. I mean, you can start to see things ahead of time, right? So I'll edit out before the playhead gets there. I mean, I'll know what someone's looks like, or you'll see the gap. So I'm making edits in real time. And this just comes with experience, I think. And that cuts down. Also, just let it go. Like, don't try to get every and ah. Like in the beginning, you'll save time because, you don't have to be so crazy about it. It starts to sound unnatural because people don't talk that way. Right. So if I'm doing an interview and someone has got ums and ahs, now if they're loaded, I reduce that to make it listenable, but I don't get rid of it all.
Right.
And so those two things, having your keyboard set up so that you can be as fast as possible and learning some keyboard shortcuts, man, you don't want to have to go up to the menu to be like edit, cut, paste. Like you don't have to do that. So you'll learn those over time. Yeah. Set up a custom keyboard for however you like to edit, and then let some stuff go. Just let it go.
Yeah, and totally it's experience because you can learn how to fly and just get it done. So that comes with experience.
Templates. Like I have templates, right? If I'm open up an Adobe Audition, it's going to have all the elements that I'm going to use every episode in it. It's going to have the music. It's also going to have the enveloping. That's going to have the fades. I'm going to have transitions.
Right.
All that stuff's going to be in place so that I'm just dragging the raw file that I record offline, so to speak, drag it in, do my processing, start my cuts, and get out.
There you go. And along those lines, I set up effects chains. So I have saved effects chains where it's like it's the red EQ, then it's a expander, then it's the red compressor, then it's a de-esser, then it's the vocal rider. That's actually the order I use them in.
Yep, and it matters. The order does matter, and that's also in my template as well. Is the basic effects I'm gonna use every time. Now again, I may have to tweak that, but it's all there and ready to go.
Right, totally. Well, this has been great, Ray. I'm so happy we could chat about. I mean, we could just go on forever talking about this.
Yeah,
I love it. But your website is thepodcasterstudio.com. Is that where everything is?
That's like a good jump off point. Yeah, you could probably get there. I mean, RayOrtega.com is where everything is because I do a lot of video and a couple different audio shows. That site, but if you want to go to the good site, go to the Podcaster Studio, and you'll find me everywhere. I go by Podcast Helper on Twitter because Ray Ortega is taken. I'm a little bitter about that, but
so funny.
Just Google me, and I pretty much own the first page of Google for my name, which is, that's a key. If you can't get a name, by producing content, your name will rise for you in Google. So.
Right. That is cool. I like that.
Yeah.
I did actually Google you.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And by the way, when I Googled your name earlier today, guess what the first thing was that came up in the Google search results?
I'm quite curious.
It was this big, huge square. It says, your agenda. Only you can see this result. Ray Ortega has made a booking. It's actually something from my calendar.
Oh, crazy.
That showed up in the Google search result. And it says, only you can see this result. Really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is it gets weird when you start Googling stuff. Like you Google yourself to see where you show up, but because Google knows what you've been doing, it prioritizes stuff. So you got to go into like that private browser and then Google yourself and see where you really rank, or have someone else do it. You're like, hey, can you Google my name? Because I don't know.
True.
I don't know where I really stand.
Well, there you go. So look, Ray, once I get the school up and running, well, we'll definitely keep in touch anyway, because once I get the school up and running, I do want to include other instructors and see how we can work together and help each other. But you're the host of the Podcaster Studio, so if you're listening to this, go listen to that show, the Podcaster Studio, as well as Podcasters Roundtable. And I'm psyched. Someday I'll be on there. I'm sure it won't be too long, but I'm totally psyched to hang with you guys.
That's the keys. Just keep bothering me. Like,
By the way,
I'm so last minute.
I told Daniel J. Lewis, I think I told Dave Jackson too, that in my opinion, for me personally, there's a Mount Rushmore of podcast experts / consultants, and Dave Jackson's head is on there, and Daniel J. Lewis's head is on there, and yours is on there too.
Nice. You might have to, you're going to update Daniel's head so that's shaved.
We could shave the rock,
Shave the rock. Yeah, I mean, that's going to be an expensive remodel, but I think he'd appreciate it for his new look. And then he's going to grow all his hair back long again. You're going to have to keep switching it, so I don't know.
Really? Is he?
No, I don't know.
You're busting him, right?
If you go and chisel it away, it's a bad joke.
There you go.
Well, but no, thank you so much. That's amazing. I mean, I agree.
Yeah, I agree. And there's another guy on that my Mount Rushmore of podcast experts called Cliff, and I don't know if he's awesome. Cliff, but yeah, yep. he's going to be on my show someday as well. So, thanks again to Ray Ortega, and thank you for listening. I know this was helpful. This was an awesome conversation. So, hope you can listen every week. And you know what? Until next time, you know what to do. Ray, do you know? Sound great. Yeah, nice.
Walk away from me well, and you can't play that part so well. Why do you play it out on me now? You like to lose control well. It's quite a feeling, isn't it? They're floating, drifting down now. You tell me that you found something better. How should I respond to that? It's a lie. I don't wanna hear it. What do you want me to say? It's a lie. I don't wanna hear it. You react some empathy. You change your attitude well. You say I just don't get it now. You say your eyes so far away now. Gave up on me well, some chance you gave and gave away. You say I wouldn't understand now. You tell me that you found something better. How should I respond to that? Oh yeah, I say now, it's a lie. Does it feel